the honors, it's not an assembly, ceremony is it's going to be at the stadium. People are going to be socially distanced, and it's going to be where they will announce the top 25. They will announce the, everybody there will be an honors graduate. So, you know, your name will be called, you'll be in your cap and gown. They're going to give out the honors stole and also the honors tassel, which is gold. I think to be honors, you have to have an A average, unweighted, A or B, something like that. There's a cutoff point. But most people that are in my, yeah, I think, I have to check on that. Every year I have to check on that. I think it's, yeah, unweighted average. But they're gonna email you ahead of time. Right now, they're just sort of like finalizing everybody's overall grades to see who qualifies for honors. And then those people get stoles. Last year, I mean, there's usually like 100 and some people that get honors. So at that event, they'll call your name, they'll give you the stole, you'll get like a certificate, you'll get the gold tassel that you wear at graduation instead of the regular tassel, like to identify yourself as an honors graduate. Your parents will be invited. I imagine that since they're using the stadium, that you'll get a certain number of guests because they'll have to socially distance too, maybe in pods like they do at the football games. I don't know. And they'll also announce the top 25. They'll announce the valedictorian, salutatorian, top 10, all of that stuff. So all of that stuff happens at the honors ceremony, but it's not going to be a banquet this year. Usually they have a banquet, but it's not doable this year. But it will be, from what I know, it's going to be an in-person event, so that's good. And you do wear your cap and gown. If you picked up your cap and gown last week, please hang it up. I don't know, it probably came in a package about this big. So you don't want to take that out 10 minutes before you leave for the honors thing and have all those lines. Like, you don't want to be the one with the window panes. Your cap and gown, those are an ancient symbol. They go all the way back to medieval times, really. And it's a symbol of accomplishment. So like, you always dress up when you wear it, and you always make sure it's pressed, and you make sure everything, you know, is situated properly on those pieces of clothing, because they're representing your accomplishment. So, you know, is there going to be somebody who shows up, you know, wearing chanclas with their cap and gown? Probably. But I feel like, you know, if you guys have been working so hard with these advanced courses, and, you know, some of you are getting your associate's degree, you know, treat your representation of that accomplishment, you know, with respect. And we've all worn it too, right? Like your parents have worn cap and gown, and, you know, your instructors have worn cap and gown a couple different times. So it's kind of like, you know, a symbol of academic accomplishment. So you want to make sure that you take it out, hang it up. Most of the wrinkles will fall out when you hang it up between now and 2 weeks from now. You can steam it if they aren't, or you can press it, but you have to use something between the iron and the gown because it's like synthetic fabric and it will melt. So you want to put like a pillowcase and then press it, or get your mom to do it. Get your mom to do it or steam it. But, you know, you deserve to look proper in your graduation attire. And, you know, I always think those people who come with it crumpled up because they threw it in the back of their car the day they got it, I always think that's probably what they think of their accomplishment. So I don't know, just a little tip. I do have some things on my YouTube channel about caps and gowns and how to get the tassel to stay right on the right hand side. Maybe I should post those. I did them a while back, but they still work. How to make it so that your honors stoles and your NHS stoles and all those things don't slip around, because it's all that slippery fabric and they'll fall off and all that stuff. So I have tips on that. I better make a note about that. Post grad videos. What else, since we're talking about seniors? I think I went through all these another time, right? We can talk about those when they get a little bit closer, but those are coming up also. You can identify those dates. I also posted this morning about the wall in my classroom. So, because you guys haven't been in my classroom ever, you probably don't know that for the last 17 years, the seniors have been decorating the wall in my classroom. And what I do is I give each one of them a block. It goes all the way back to the first graduating class. When we had when we first opened the building in 2000, they gave us the task of trying to figure out what were some, like, traditions that we wanted to continue. So we wrote the alma mater and the fight song, and Mr. Ramos and I came up with the slogan for the school, the one that's written in the small gym. And different teachers came up with different things, like especially for the graduating class in 2004. And what I came up with was letting the seniors paint my wall. What normally happens is, like, March, April, May, we try to finish our classwork earlier in the week. And then on the Friday, I'll give everybody like an hour, hour and a half to be painting their block. And some people just put their name, or they put things they like, or where they're going to go to school. I made a slideshow of all 17 of the previous walls. You can look at it at your leisure if you want. And a couple of teachers that you might know were my students way back when. You could see the blog that they did, but it's been a tradition. Last year, we didn't get to finish the wall, as you can expect, but I do have a plan for this year. So those of you that want to participate, it's just for senior recognition and, kind of like celebration. It's not for a grade or anything, but you can make your block at home. Normally we can't have everybody in here painting, but I gave you the dimensions. They're right here on this. This is first period. Let me go to second period. They're right here on this slide, this notification. So it's like 8 inches tall and 15.5 inches wide. So if you want to do a block, you can create it at home on some poster board over the next while. And then in May, I've already set up a date, May 7th and 8th, where we're going to have a drop-in sort of installation celebration where y'all can come in, put your block up where you want it to be. I'll have some little goodie bags for you and stuff like that sometime during that Friday and Saturday. So that we can kind of celebrate the ending of the school year and try to do what we normally do. I don't know if that makes sense, but I've been racking my brain trying to think of a way that could work, and I think that's the best way. So if you want to participate, you can, and that's how you'll do it. I'll remind you as we go through. The juniors don't do it. Even if they're in English 4, they can do it next year, right? A lot of them take my independent studies class, so they'll have an opportunity. Hopefully we can do it in person next year. But anyway, that's for the seniors. That's all I know about right now, that and the movie night. Any questions about any of the senior stuff going on? I don't know anything else. Okay. All right, so let's go to this week then and start talking about our material for class. You can see I'm here in Lilliput. Are we going to have one of those senior drive-by parade things? Yeah, it's scheduled for May 14th. May 14th at 7 till 8:30. Last year they did it, they just drove around the circle, and like all of the staff and everybody was sort of in the middle. I think it'll be a little more organized this year. But yeah, they do have a senior parade scheduled for May 14th. What else? More info coming up on that, I guess, later. All right, where was I? Okay, so today we're going to finish up with Gulliver's Travels. I want to make sure that we have some time with the study guide. I'm also going to do an introduction to the Romantic period, which is our new unit. Do you know how many tickets we are getting for graduation? No, I don't. I do think that there will be a reasonable limit. I don't see them lifting the CDC guidelines before graduation, but I think they're going to wait until we get a little bit closer. Usually they give tickets out for rain purposes the day before graduation or graduation morning at practice. But this year's different because they'll have to be giving tickets based on actual. Those tickets are usually used in case of rain. We only had to do that one time, and it was 2 people. But I don't know. I think with the stadium, they might extend that. But obviously, you have to be. Your family can be together, but then I think there needs to be a 6-foot distance between other families. But we'll get more information about that later on. I don't. They haven't said yet. Yeah, if you have questions about any of the senior stuff, just email me, and if I don't know, I'll find out. I'll find out and get back to you. All right, so let's start with the Gulliver's Travel Study Guide. Last week I went over the first part with you and asked you to finish reading Gulliver's Travels, just part 1. We're not going to be reading all 4 sections of it, just the part about the Lilliputians. So you should have finished reading that. And I want to know today if you have any questions, anything from the study guide that you want me to talk about. So I want to do make a couple of notes. Oh, you know what I talked about before this was the midterm. Yeah, let me talk about the midterm. You can be looking over those questions if you want and list any that you want me to spend a little time on. So the midterm had mixed results. There were 3 people who made hundreds on the midterm, and there were some people who did fine, and there were some people that I feel like I was kind of surprised. I thought they would do better. Even if it was a passing grade, I was kind of like, I wonder what happened there. Some people left questions blank, and obviously I have to give a blank question a 0 if there's nothing there. The reason I mention this is because the final exam in May is set up just like the midterm, except it's for the material from the second half of the term. So starting with Paradise Lost to, starting with Gulliver's Travels, or maybe it is, Paradise Lost was on the test, from Gulliver's Travels to the end of the term. So it's set up the exact same way, same number of questions, same types of questions, just with the second half material. So if maybe you did an okay job, but not as well as you would have liked on the midterm, I would recommend a few things. Number 1, take notes. Take notes. You should be reading the material, taking notes, coming to class, taking notes of the stuff that I talk about. I don't explicitly say take notes because I just assume you're taking notes all the time. I think the people who made the highest marks probably had really good notes, and then they could shuffle between their notes to do their exam and find everything that they needed. Another thing that I think could help you is making sure, well, the 2 of you are almost always here for class, but if you're watching this later and you don't always come to the Zoom class, you need to be really religious about going to see the video of class, because every day that we have class, I record it. And I know that some people are out for different reasons, even if you're out for school reasons, like there's the ACT today. So I think the juniors are mostly out. So you have to go back and watch the video. You can watch it at 1.5 speed or whatever. When I talk like this, it'll be super fast. But that's fine. But you need to go back and take notes over that material, because what I do when I'm meeting with you, of course, is I know what's on that midterm and I'm trying to emphasize those things. I'm trying to make sure you have a good understanding of the material. And I'm also emphasizing the things that I know are going to show up later on. So taking notes on those things is beneficial to you. I can't go over everything from all of those pages, those 40 pages of Gulliver's Travels, but I'm going to talk about the most important things. You're still responsible and going to be asked questions about the whole thing, but I'm trying to get to the heart of the matter. I'm trying to help you with parts that might have been confusing. That's what I'm doing in class. So, if you're out, make sure that you watch those videos and take notes. Make sure you've read all of the material. I noticed that there were some on some tests. I don't remember if it was the people that are here in class today or not, but there were some blanks and there were some who guessed. And there was also some people who took like 10 or 12 hours to do the test, which surprised me because it tells me on each one how long the test was in action. And I'm assuming that those people like started it and took a nap or something. I I can't conceive of why the exam would take you 10 hours to do, except that. So I'm assuming that's what I'm assuming happened. But I think most of the people that made A's and B's probably took between right around 3 hours, something like that for the midterm. So, you know, I don't know if it took people a long time. Maybe they had to go and look up a bunch of stuff, but that's not the point. The point is you should have learned that stuff. So, just some advice for the final. But I think most people who have been participating in class and taking notes performed fairly well on the midterm. All right, I don't see you guys mentioning any of these things from the study guide in the note in the chat. So let me talk about a couple of main things, and it will lead into this week's discussion also, which is on Gulliver. So I think that, you know, we know that Gulliver's Travels is a satire, and that's what the topic is this week for the discussion. If you recognize that there are three things that he's satirizing generally, everything that happens in Gulliver's Travels is a commentary on life in Swift's time. But there are three really big ones. One of them is let me see if I can get the number here for the question so that you can make a note and get the spelling right. One is number 3 right here, the Slamexans and the Tremeskins. When he talks about them, like the high heels and the low heels, he's talking about the political parties at the time in his time period. And they were the Whigs and the Tories. I think there's a footnote on the page where they're introduced in chapter 3 or 4. And so he sort of makes fun of the way that they're distinguished because one of them has high shoes and one of them has low shoes. And that satire, because he's saying there really isn't that much difference between political parties, right? Just your perspective, whether you're up here or whether you're down here. And so that's one of the main areas that he is satirizing by making these Lilliputians separate themselves based on the size of their heels of their shoes. Another one is the big Indians and the little Endians, not Indians, Endians. The story explains that long ago there was a king whose son hurt himself on an eggshell. He was trying to get a hard-boiled egg, you know, how you have to crack it and get the shell off. He was trying to do that and he cut himself. And so he forbid everyone from using the big end of the egg, and they can only get the egg out from the little end. Well, that's another satire because in this case, he's satirizing religion. Who cares really what side of the egg shell the egg comes out of, or which side you're going to tap to get the egg to crack? Nobody cares as long as you get the egg, right? Out of it. But he's satirizing the Catholics and the Protestants because they both believe in God, they both believe in Christ, they both have the same Bible pretty much. So then why are they always at each other's throats? Why in England at the time? So big Indians and little Indians is, you can look into it more in the text for your discussion if you want, but that is a criticism of religious division and the Protestants and the Catholics. Then the last one is the Lilliputians versus the Blefuscians. Yeah, Blefuscians, I think is how it's pronounced. You can see that name right here on number 5. Blefuscians are their nearest neighbors. It's another island. Lilliput is an island, and Blefuscu is an island, and they are at war with each other, and they represent England and France. England and France throughout history are always fighting, and so there's that comes into play toward the end of part 1 because Gulliver ends up being exiled, and partly because of his interest in the Blefuscians, that he goes to see them, and the Lilliputians see that as, you know, a traitorous act. So England versus France, Catholics and Protestants, and Whigs and Tories. Those are the three main things that he's satirizing. It's not all that he's satirizing, but those are the three main elements. And he trivializes them because he doesn't understand, like, it's a big deal to them which end of the egg you're using, and it's a political, you know, like a religious symbol of what religion you belong to, which end of the egg. And by making it as trivial as an egg, he's sort of saying, does it really matter all that much how you open the egg? And it seems trivial to Gulliver, and in the way that it might seem trivial about why people have, you know, hatred for other religions when religion is supposed to be about, you know, God and that sort of stuff. So take a look through those questions. If there's any that you want me to talk about, now would be a good time. You can just put the question number in the chat, or we can move on. I do have some notes for you today on the Romantic period. If all these questions like seem like you already know the answer to them from reading, then we can move on. Or you can come up with your own question. If you're not sure about something, you can put it in the chat and I'll answer it. I think Gulliver's Travels is an enjoyable read. It's sort of, it's narrative and it's detailed and you're kind of like in a new world. And so it's fantastical in that way. But we just can't forget when we study literature, the political implications or the intention of the author. And the author here is definitely trying to make fun of the society that he lives in. Okay, well, I don't see anything in the chat. So if something pops up there, I'll come back to that toward the end and deal with it with you. Otherwise, I want to move ahead and show you the new unit, which is, of course, in course content on Blackboard. The Romantic period should be visible for you. Oh, wait, this is the wrong class. Oh, this is the right class. Should be visible for you now. So a few things as I go through that you're going to want to make note of. The very first thing that I put in Unit 4 is that the PDF that I gave you for the first half of the term runs out. This is a 2-book textbook. So we'll be starting the second book now, and this is the PDF for the readings from here on out. So you can click here and download it. I highly recommend that you just get your own copy and put it on your computer because it's long, just like the first one. And you know, it's like 3,000 pages of a PDF. And if you're always looking at it online, like in your Google Drive, it glitches, like it doesn't scroll fast enough for me. So I do recommend downloading that on your computer, but all the new material will come from this PDF. And I put it several times in this unit so that you can access it. You should be able to download it. Here's the introduction to Romanticism, Romantic literature. I highly recommend you read that. It's just sort of a good background about what we'll be looking at. Here are the objectives. They're all quite similar from unit to unit, except we're moving into Romanticism and the origins of Romantic literature. Be able to write about what you're reading, use source material, communication skills, all of that stuff. This is all what we're going for. Here are the readings. We only really have 3 days with the Romantic period. Here's the textbook again, in case you need it. And so I kind of chunked them. This part is for Thursday. So this is your reading for Thursday. We're not reading everything by these 3 authors. We'll be talking about the background of the Romantic period. I'm going to give you a PowerPoint in a minute that goes through the majority of the main stuff from those pages, but those are the pages that you should look over. And then I've selected 2, sometimes 3 poems from the 3 poets that we'll talk about on Thursday: Charlotte Smith, Robert Burns, and William Wordsworth. So you only need to read the background material for each of the poets, and then the one poem that's mentioned. So you're not reading all of pages 182 to 183. You're just looking at this poem. It just happens to go, go over a page. So we'll talk about Romantic poetry on Thursday this week. And then next Tuesday, we'll talk about, these are the three kings of Romantic poetry, and Byron, Shelley, and Keats. So we'll look at some of their representative works next Tuesday. And then next Thursday, we'll be talking about an essay written by Mary Wollstonecraft. As you'll see in the notes in a minute, this is a time period where we have, the beginnings of women's suffrage, women's rights, the idea that women should be able to vote. And so we'll read just the introduction to A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, which is, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 pages long. The whole piece is much longer, but we're just going to read the introduction. That will be for next Thursday. So I kind of chunked them off based on days. So this is the stuff for this Thursday. Here are the discussion questions, 7 and 8. There are only 10 in the term, so we just did 5. We should have done the responses for 5 for yesterday, and then 6 is this Friday, and 7 and 8 are for this next unit. So we're getting into the second half. I'll go over these when we get a little bit closer to doing them. They're later on in April. Here's where I post links to all the YouTube videos. You can also just go to the link that's on the Start Here page that I have for the YouTube playlist, but I list each one. I'll highlight it and turn it into a link once I have the video ready. And then other materials. Here's the textbook again, and here's the slideshow that I'm going to go through today about the Romantic period. It doesn't take me long to do the Romantic period. I wanted to talk about discussion number 6 before I move on to the Romantic period, because 6 is due this Friday. And it's about Gulliver's Travels. So the question is about, in what way does Lilliput represent British society? So you should be thinking about what you know about the time period in Britain, maybe from your world history class, or if you're taking Euro, AP. So what is he trying to represent? I already given you a few different ideas, but you should come up with your own ideas. If you just talk about the eggs and basically say what I say, then it's not going to be a great grade. We know that Swift is one of the writers most associated with satire, so this would mean that within the text there are examples of a veiled criticism of his own society. So where do you see some examples of that? Quote and connect them to what he's criticizing about his society. Now, if it's been a while since you had world history, or you're not taking Euro, and the time period, you're not sure about the historical background, like it's hard to say Lilliput represents this in 1700s Britain if you're not sure what was going on in 17th century Britain. So I did put some reference articles and pages down here just in case that helps you. I don't know what you remember from your history classes. Maybe you've got it all. Maybe they skipped around or went through this part quickly, or I don't know. So I just put some references here to help you do a good job answering this week's question. So basically I want to know what commentary about his society is Swift trying to make through part 1 of Gulliver's Travels. So I think also the study guide should help you with that, because there are some questions about that on the study guide too. And then the replies are due Monday. All right, I'm going to go through the information on the Romantic period so that you can get some notes on it. So I don't think that's tons of notes, but a few things historically. We're moving into the end of the 1700s and into the 1800s with this time period. And so we have more and more literature to look at. There's an image here. The Romantic period we associate with, kind of an author who is deep and thoughtful, sometimes isolated. And so I picked this picture here for the slideshow because it kind of demonstrates that isolation with the typical Romantic writer. Now, when we talk about Romantic, I'm going to talk about what that define that for you. But first, let's talk about history, what's going on in the time period. We're talking about, for the Romantic period, we're talking about around 1785 till 1832. In American terms, that goes from, just after the Revolutionary War to just before the Civil War. But we're not going to be reading American literature, we're going to be reading British literature. The British have a different perspective on the American Revolution. This is a time period that had a lot of debates about abolishing slavery, because that triangle trade had been going on for a while. The US didn't outlaw slavery until 1865, but Britain did it much earlier in 1807. So the triangle trade of, slavery for goods and so on, that we have been studying since probably sixth grade, happened a lot earlier in Britain than it did in England at pretty much the turn of the 19th century. The French Revolution also happens during this time, so the idea that everybody has personal rights and goes along with the outlawing of slavery, and also some of the female voices that we start to see during this time. I'll talk about that in a minute. Beginning of a change from an agricultural society to an industrial one. So people are moving to the cities even more than they did in the 17th century or the 18th century. And so this whole society is shifting from agricultural to industrial, and population is increasing. Laissez-faire is a term that you probably already know, but that attitude is crucial with the problems that existed with labor. So these factories grew up, there's steam power, there are ways to manufacture goods at a high rate of speed, and the people who owned the companies, manufacturing companies and factories and things, didn't really care how their goods were created. There weren't any laws about how long a person can work or how many breaks they should get. If you have a job, you know that you get a 15-minute break for every number of hours that you work. You get a lunch break if you work from this time to this time. None of that stuff existed during this time period. And so the workers were in horrendous conditions. Children were working and getting injured and dying. The safety of equipment wasn't a factor. It was just about how can we get materials out and sell them. And so the upper class, excels and makes money off of the backs of the lower class. And there's that laissez-faire attitude. Well, whatever happens, as long as I get my bottom line. And it ruined people. And the poor suffered even more. They could never really improve, even though in society that caste system is kind of gone, the feudal system, and they could advance, but how can you advance when you're getting sick on your job and you're working, huge numbers of hours, you're exhausted all the time. There's no way that you can advance. So they suffer while the wealthy prosper off of their labor. I don't think there's still situations today where that occurs. Now, the topic romantic and the term romantic, there was an issue with this also on the midterm, because we talked about in medieval times the romance. The romance is a genre of literature that we see with Gawain, right? Like there's this ideal attitude about it, the lords and the ladies, and Gawain has this perfect way of being chivalrous. And so it doesn't have anything to do with falling in love or two people being together. In literature, when we talk about something being romantic, we mean that it's been idealized, right? Like it's been glazed over, it's got a filter on it. Like, if I took a picture, like a selfie, and I was going to put it on Instagram, before I upload it, I might put on a filter that makes me look younger or healthier or whatever. And so romanticism is like that kind of a filter, making it better, trying to look at life through that lens of the ideal. Well, the blemishes are still there. It's just that with literature, they're trying to look on the ideal side. And so when we say something's romantic, we mean it's a romantic filter's been put on it to make it seem better and, more beautiful. I don't know. There's a beauty filter on TikTok that people use. Yeah, like that. So the term romantic is about that, not really about love. Some people wrote about the one of the words that could have come up on the midterm was romance, and some people wrote about how it's when two people fall in love, and that is not what we're talking about with literary romance or the romantic period. Note that this is a time period that is not named after the king or the queen, right? It's not the Victorian period or the Elizabethan period or the Jacobean period. It's about art, and it's about artistic qualities of being romantic and idealized. So obviously art and literature was important during this time because the whole period is named after that, not whoever was king at the time. I already mentioned this, but people in this time started to think about previous eras as being very romantic. They looked back and saw the ideals of medieval society with chivalry and lords and ladies, and oh, wasn't that a simpler time with more kindness, and everybody was so much better then. It's sort of like the way people look back at the 50s and they're like, or the 80s, and they're like, oh, it was a much simpler time. And so they look back, and a lot of the pieces that you'll read will reference medieval works or classic works going back even to like ancient Greece, like when we were reading first semester Oedipus, thinking that those times were more ideal because they were so long ago, like modern life didn't complicate the way people thought about things back then. There's a lot of nostalgia, people looking back and trying to remember what it was like in simpler times, because now we've got this time of these factories and people suffering in the workplace and women wanting equal rights. So in a time of upheaval, people usually try to look back and think about what was so wonderful before as a coping mechanism, I guess you could say. Mm, it's kind of important to mention that these time periods, they didn't invent their own name for their own time periods. Like romantic writers weren't like, oh, let's all get together and we'll write, in a romantic way. It's the next generation or the generation after that looks back and says, oh, well, while they were writing during this time period, there was this quality that they all kind of gravitated toward, and that is, has these qualities. It's actually the Victorians that named the Romantics the next generation and they did it almost to make fun of them, because the Victorians are very pragmatic, they're very practical in their mindset, and the writers are very practical. And so they look back at the previous generation of writers and they're like, ugh, they were stuck in the past, they were stuck in this ideal world, whereas we live in the real world and we want to write about real things. And so they called them the Romantics as a put down. And kind of like the way nowadays, people, I'm a Gen Xer, so people will, in my generation, will say, oh, these millennials, they don't get it or whatever. Or people will say, okay, boomer. Like, it's kind of like that, a little bit of shade between the generations, because every generation fights against the previous generation. You're not going to like the same music as your parents, probably because it's your parents' music, right? But what's coming back? 80s. Why? Because the generation before your parents, now that stuff is so far removed that it's kind of retro and cool and all that sort of thing. So every generation goes against whatever happened previous to them. All right, I want to finish up in the next couple minutes here. So characteristics of Romantic era literature. One of them is that people started to accept that different people had different perspectives on the world, and that was okay. It's called eclecticism, and you can click here for more information if you want, but eclecticism is sort of like, to be eclectic means you're kind of artsy and a little bit all over the place and that sort of thing. And so eclecticism is about how different people have different interests and different views, and it's okay to not all be like herd mentality and to think about other people have different ways of looking at the world. And we can bring that into today too. We have, adaptations of that in our world today. The rise of the female voice, I already mentioned that, but they were called blue stockings. You can click there too to get more info if you want. But basically, you know, women started to say, we have something to contribute. We have a say in how money is spent, or, you know, those of us that are, you know, independent livers or whatever. So the rise of the female voice and the spark of the women's rights movement and suffrage. Suffrage actually happens earlier in Britain too. In terms of poetry, nature is a character, not just something for us to think about. So lots of times poets will address clouds or the sun or some flowers or a field or whatever, like it's a character, and personify those elements of nature. Use apostrophe to talk to the moon as a character. Another characteristic of poetry during this time is an overflow of emotion. The idea of creating is a big concept. Being spontaneous and artistic and kind of the moment is big for Romantic era literature. This is a big one. I would probably put a star by this one. Glorification of the simple and ordinary. Instead of something being overwhelming, like I can go to the mountains and see the grandeur of the mountains, the Romantics kind of took the small things and made them important and significant. So this petal on this flower, this blade of grass, this one tree in the forest can spark intellectual, you know, and artistic inspiration, not just the big things. Individualism and alienation. I think that image that I had at the beginning of the PowerPoint demonstrates that, but everybody was kind of working with their own idea about their own art. And because we have the acceptance of individual perspectives, it's more accepted at this time that people could go their own way during the Romantic period in terms of their art. There are a lot of first-person speakers in Romantic period poetry and dramatic narrators. We'll look at some examples on Thursday. Gothic novels. I had to take out some of the Gothic stuff that I had planned because of the winter storm that we had. So we'll kind of generally talk about the Gothic, but I think that's probably not going to be prominent in the final exam at all because we just don't have time to look at examples of it. And of course, I say this every unit, but we have more and more literary production, more genres, more printing presses are widely available. The prices of books are coming down. People have more disposable income that they can purchase books. So, you know, literacy is up. That happens throughout history, going all the way back to Beowulf. All right, characteristics of Romantic era literature continue. There's one more, and this is probably, if I had to sum up, if somebody said to me, can you give me a one sentence explanation of the Romantic era, it would probably be this. Sort of like reducing it to its lowest common denominator is art for art's sake. Ars gratia artis is Latin for art's sake, meaning we're making art not because we are trying to get a message across, like John Milton was trying to point out about sin and our relationship with God and how we should work on that, and so that we don't end up in hell. And you know, Gulliver's Travels is art for a purpose. Swift was making fun of his society, and so in the Romantic era, next after that is the idea of making art just because it's beautiful. This poem doesn't have to have a super deep or complex meaning. It can just sound beautiful. It can just bring up beautiful images. So ars gratia artis, you might have seen that before. If you've ever been to the movies, you've probably seen the opening part where it's MGM and they have this lion that roars. It's part of their logo here, ars gratia artis, art for art's sake. We make art just because we're moved to do it. These last few slides are just different writers. We're not going to read all of them, but I do want you to notice that all their portraits have something in common. They all have dark backgrounds, and then the people always look like they're lost in thought, and a lot of like senior portrait poses William Blake is here. You know, he looks like he got caught off guard and he's staring at something. Mary Wollstonecraft, we're going to read a section of her writing. Dark background, light color. Wordsworth, deep in thought. All the Romantic writers are depicted like this because that's what art was like at the time too. Brooding figures thinking about art for art's sake. There's Percy Shelley. He's the husband of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. John Keats and Lord Byron. So George Gordon, Lord Byron. They're all, you know, deep in thought about all of their romantic ideas in those portraits. I didn't realize it until I made this slideshow, and all the available portraits were all really similar in style, and that's Romanticism, pretty much. The dramatic, thoughtful writer. All right, any questions over the background on Romanticism? I know that's brief, but you can read in the text pages that are listed. I don't have room to put on the calendar the page numbers for each day, so you're going to have to go back to the course content and look at them under readings right here, so that you know which parts to read. But we'll be talking about all of this section, these first 4 bullets, on Thursday, and then these 3 are for next Tuesday. Are there any questions before we sign off? I feel like you had no questions already prepared, Sean. You just were waiting to hit the button. I don't know why I feel like that. Came up real quick. No questions. All right. Okay, if anything comes up, let me know. We do have a discussion that's due on Friday, so if you start working on that, maybe I can address some questions that you might have on Thursday. Other than that, I hope you all have a good day, and I will see you on Thursday. Bye. Bye, Christina. Bye, Sean.